Hi again, Alistair Ben here. Um, Here we are, case study video 5. Picking up from where we were before, we now have our two files that we took to cover the exposure issues in this frame. Now, as we've said at the closing stages of video 4, these two images are probably savable with contemporary techniques. We now have the power of Lightroom 5 to pull out details from shadows and control highlights, and this is definitely an image that we could save either using the bright exposure and darkening the highlights, or using the dark exposure and brightening the shadows. We are going to do neither. We're going to use this image to blend the two files in Photoshop, and as you can see from this this situation here, because we have such an irregular horizon line, using a simple gradient will not work. If we were to try that and mimic the look of a graduated neutral density filter, so let's say 2 stops, so if we make that 1.9, 2.25, 2.15, okay, 1.95 stops with a graduated neutral density filter, will make the line reasonably long to replicate what you would say would be a 2-stop soft ND. And that is very much what you would be getting if you had used a graduated neutral density filter. The CSAT has been darkened, the top of this cliff has been darkened, and we now have a scenario whereby, yes, we have a nice foreground boulder, we have a tonally consistent image, but we have created a problem. We've solved a problem with the sky being now controlled within a single exposure, but we've created another problem because we have areas of darkening. Now, going back and trying to then overcome those by using brushes and things like that to overcome it, you're having to use techniques to repair problems. Now, at the end of the day, it's your choice. These are your images, and you can decide how to do this any way you want. If you'd wanted to shoot this particular scene with a single frame, then yes, it's probably doable. But we're now at a stage where we want to go back to, get to a situation where we're using new techniques. So, what I would start with here is I always do my chromatic aberration and sharpening preset, and we will sync that so that both files have had that done to them. Now, as with some of the earlier videos, I want to create an image whereby we have solved some of these inconsistencies between the two frames, so that when we're actually blending the images, we're going to be blending something that is closer to where we're going with it in terms of the overall look and feel. And really what I'm doing here is just tidying up both of these files so that they're actually getting quite close together. This one I've probably gone too far. Dial that back so that we do have a darker sky. What you tend to find if you use the shadow and highlights recovery in Lightroom, you will ultimately start to get to a stage where you're creating a halo between these two objects, the sky and the darker rocks. It's an absolute foregone conclusion. Now, this is our brighter exposure, so we are wanting to brighten that foreground quite a bit, and we will just dial back that sky exposure. So this is our foreground, this is our sky, and these are the two images that we're going to work. I'm happy with everything else, so I'm just going to open it as layers in Photoshop. Once we have them in Photoshop, it's then a case of separating out the bits that we want from the two files. And the simplest way we're going to start doing this, because we discovered earlier on that we can't use gradients anymore. We can't use the gradient tool. So we have to use another alternative method. So here we are in Photoshop. We have the sky exposure on the top and the foreground exposure on the bottom. The most simple way to create a selection that we can use is using the quick selection tool. And it is a very, very rapid tool, and all we have to do is draw around the horizon line, and the mask pretty much snaps straight to the horizon. Now we will refine that edge because we want to make sure that we're snapping onto all these little tufts of grass and things like that. The quickest way to do that is use the Smart Radius tool and increase your radius to 4, 5, 6 pixels, something like that, and that should be adequate. If you want to do a little bit of fine tuning, you can use this here, which is the Refine Radius tool, and you have a brush size here that you can increase and decrease. So make it a little bit bigger, and you can just draw along the horizon. This is usually necessary if you have some sort of vegetation or something on the horizon, a tree or something like that. For this particular image it's not really necessary, but we'll use it as an illustration. You can see we've picked up little blades of grass on the top there, and what we're doing was we're producing an extremely clean mask between these two images. Once we're happy with that, we can click OK, and that creates our mask, which remains selected. Something I always do is click Select, Save Selection, and call it what it is, Sky. And that has now created a new channel mask called Sky. Because this is still selected, we can now do a couple of things. One is just to create a mask, and that now pardon me, has erased the bottom section of this image and let the bottom come through. So that, sorry, the bottom section of the top image has gone, and we're now looking at the lower image, and what we're doing is we're now superimposing a darker sky. Now as you can see, that kind of looks a little bit ugly. So what we can do is we can use a black brush, so pardon me, a white brush at a very low opacity but a large size. So something near very gentle, 17–18%, and we just click through there. So we are getting a little bit of darkening of our C stack, but it's always a good idea to touch with the brush in this area here, because that's a bright reflection. So we're wanting to pull through some of those details from the top image, because that's what's being reflected. So very, very quickly, we have a darker C stack than perhaps we would have had in the bottom exposure. But like I said in other videos, having some darkening towards the horizon is acceptable, and having a very bright object against a darker sky really doesn't look very effective at all. So that is the simplest way to create one of these masks, which is using the quick selection tool, draw around the horizon, create a mask over that top layer, and it instantly just deletes the foreground parts of that, and then with a white brush, sorry, you can just continue to darken some of those other areas in the foreground. And there we have it. That's the starting point of an image that we can now work. I call this stage, this is pretty much the first stage in my workflow. It's blending the two images to create what I call tonally consistent. The top looks like it belongs to the bottom, And that's the first job. We're dealing with the biggest issue that we're going to have to deal with in photography, which is global contrast and global consistency. What we do with that image later on will be the subject of other videos, but for now, that's the end of this case study, and back to the book.